Good afternoon, ladies and gents. Welcome to Jane Eyre by Charlotte Brontë. There seem to be two groups of people who tend to make life hell for those around them. Rich snobs and poor fundamentalists. And to love any of them is really difficult. Today's cast are Jane Eyre as a girl and as a young woman of 18. She's an orphan and at the story's outset depends on the goodwill of her aunt, Mrs. Reed, which is rather a scarce resource. Then we meet Mr. Rochester, a quite rich and eccentric gentleman, and Mr. St. John Rivers. Yes, St. John is his very Christian name. He's a young vicar and no less eccentric. As a matter of fact, most of the people in the novel are somewhat strange, which makes it so realistic. And of course, there's quite a few side figures. Charlotte Brontë published her novel in 1847 under the pseudonym Currer Bell. That's a male name because women weren't supposed to do anything really at the time. This fictional autobiography has a lot to do with her own life. Her father was a vicar and she had some working experience as a governess. The novel starts at the aunt's house, Gateshead, where her bastard sort of cousin torments her. "What are you reading behind that curtain? You parasite, give me the book and stand at the door." And viciously he throws the book at her and hurts her and they fight. Murderer, Nero, but help is at hand for John. "You beast, Jane, solitary confinement for you in the death chamber of your uncle." But it gets dark and Jane hears funny noises and panics. "Let me out!" But Mrs. Reed just locks her away and Jane panics, collapses and gets really sick. Mrs. Reed is convinced that Jane is just a simulating, lying little creep and finds a boarding school for orphans named Lowood run by Mr. Brocklehurst. "By the way, she's a liar. We'll get that out of her system. Bye-bye." "I'm not a liar." And she's taken to Lowood, where she makes the acquaintance of Helen, a genius of a girl who still is frequently beaten by a teacher. And she goes, "Why do you put up with that?" "Because I deserve it. I need to be corrected. When we are beaten without reason, we should strike back hard." Nice Mr. Brocklehurst tries to reduce the number of the orphans by keeping food and fuel to a minimum. Yuck! The porridge is burnt! Fortunately, there's nice Miss Temple. "Extra cheese and bread for the girls." "Miss Temple? Excuse me?" "Well, the porridge was inedible. Why didn't you fast and pray then with the girls?" And at this point, Jane breaks her slate and he goes, "Aha, the liar, step forward." And he puts her on a stool and in front of the whole school goes, "She is obsessed by the devil. Nobody speak to her." But after this unfair treatment, Miss Temple makes friends with her. Now, obviously, the little orphans didn't pray enough because the school is struck with a typhus epidemic and more than half of the girls get sick. Among them, Helen. "Bye, Jane." "Why bye? Are you going home?" "Yes, to my last home." And she dies. Jane stays for many years at the school and even works there as a teacher. But then she finds a job as a governess at Thornfield. Here she lives with a housekeeper, Miss Fairfax, who is a really nice elderly lady, and has to teach little Adele, whom the owner has brought from France. And she has a fantastic life there. It's just a little lonesome sometimes. So one cold winter night, you imagine now that this is a winter landscape, she takes a walk and a horseman comes up from the village and goes, "Ah!" Slides on the ground and falls down. "Sir, can I help you? Are you hurt?" She helps him back on his horse and he gallops on. And of course, this is Mr. Rochester, who has now a sprained ankle and is not amused. "So you bewitched my horse, eh? You're not very interesting. You think me handsome?" "Well, no, sir." "Neither are you." He's morose, she's stubborn, so in time they get on rather well. He even confides in her. Adele, by the way, is the daughter of a French dancer who I kind of lived with in Paris. She said I was the father, but then she cheated on me and I dumped her and shot her lover. She abandoned Adele, so I took her on. In the night, Jane hears a demonic laughter. Wait a minute, something's burning here. And it is actually Rochester's bed that is burning. She hurries into his sleeping room and extinguishes the flames and saves him. And he goes, "Wow, that must have been that strange servant, Grace Poole." "What? Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much." "Anytime, sir." I wonder if he really likes me." In the morning, Rochester's gone and only comes back a couple of days later in the company of quite a number of ladies and gentlemen, among them Blanche Ingram. What a bitch! She's probably the ideal wife for him. And Rochester and Blanche have a lot of fun together and Jane is now really unhappily in love with him. One evening when Rochester's away, Mr. Mason arrives. "Hi, I'm Mr. Mason." And then a strange gypsy woman wants to tell the ladies' fortunes. Last but not least, Jane is admitted into her presence and the gypsy says, "So, you love your boss, huh? Don't fuck around with me. He's going to get married to Blanche Ingram." Do you know me? And of course it is Rochester, who had dressed up like a gypsy. Ha ha, really funny, sir. By the way, Mr. Mason has arrived. What? And he's really shocked. And in the middle of the night, he calls Jane to him. Jane, yes, Mason has been wounded by this strange servant, Grace Poole. Sit with him while I get a doctor. And before dawn, he chucks Mason out. Thanks for helping me with this. Whenever I can be useful, sir. Really? Well then, why don't you sit up with me the night before I get married? And she goes, ah, and he leaves her in agony. Jane then learns that her cousin John is dead and her aunt is dying, so she goes to visit her one last time at Gateshead. Are you Jane Eyre? Yes. I always hated you, but well, I'm dying, so here goes. You have got an uncle in Madeira who wants to leave his fortune to you, but I told him you were dead. Ah, and she dies. And Jane goes, good riddance. So after a couple of weeks, she comes back to Thornfield, and Rochester goes, Fairy, where have you been? I have been to see my aunt off, but now I'm coming home because home is where you are. And then one midsummer night, they are walking out in the orchard, and he goes, do you want to marry me? Don't fuck around with me, I'm not. I'm asking you to marry me. And so she goes, yes, I will. But as if heaven had something against that, there's a thunderstorm. Okay, so we'll marry in private and then go to the continent, right? And the day before the marriage is going to take place. Wow, Rochester, last night I had such a mean dream. A woman came in and tore my veil apart, which he had given to her. Right, that was a vampire or Grace Poole. Just stay up with me tonight. Finally, they go to church. And the vicar says his little standard thing. Anyone know of any obstacles to the marriage? When actually a solicitor steps forward and says, well, yes, Mr. Rochester is already married to Mr. Mason's sister, who is hidden at Thornfield Hall. And he goes, ah! Yes, it's true. And he takes the whole company up to the 3rd floor of Thornfield Hall, where his wife lives hidden. So everyone, this is my lunatic wife who's being looked after by the strange servant Grace Poole, who is actually an alcoholic, which is why the monster sometimes slips from her care. And she attacks him, but he gets away. And afterwards he tries to explain, it's not what it looks like, Jane. I was forced into this marriage by my father, but this woman went insane immediately. I put her here and tried to forget on the continent, but I couldn't. And then you were here and I fell in love with you and staged this whole Blanche Ingram thing. So you would love me too. Here, live with me without being married. As your mistress? Jane is shocked. And she goes to bed and in the night flees from Thornfield with only a couple of pennies in her pocket. A couple of days later, she is really starved and desperate and knocks randomly on doors. Yes? Go away, but I'm starving. Tough luck. Let her enter. And in that moment, she makes the acquaintance of St. John and his 2 sisters, who are living in a nice little place named Marsh End. They keep her, they get on really well in a sibling kind of way. Can you help me find a job? My sisters need to go to work as governesses again, and I'm going to sacrifice myself as a missionary, but you can run a village school for girls I've set up. Yes, please. And this is exactly what she does. She lives in a cottage that goes with the school, and he visits her every day, but there's another woman, a rich heiress named Rosamond Oliver, who is actually paid for the school, and he's quite taken with her. And one day he says, what? You've painted Rosamond? Can I have a copy? Why don't you go for the original? No, I'm going to sacrifice myself as a missionary in India. And a little later he comes again and says, here, you've inherited a fortune from your uncle. What? How do you know about that? I'm a vicar, well, I'm your cousin too, and he disinherited me and my sisters. Oh, well, in that case, we'll just split it in 4. No, yes, and it is done that way, and they live again at Marsh End. One day he goes, here, I'm going to sacrifice myself as a missionary in India, help me learn Hindi. Okay, and come with me to India. Okay, and marry me. No, why would I? I don't love you. Ah, love, humbug. You were made for work, not for love. And he's bullying her in a really mean psychological way, and she goes, excuse me, if you want my help, you can have it, but I'm not going to be your wife slave. Yes, no. And then in the middle of the night, she hears a cry. Jane! What? I'm coming. Next day, she sets out for Thornfield, because of course she hasn't forgotten Rochester, but instead of the stately mansion, she finds only a blackened ruin. It has burnt to the ground, the mad wife died in the effort, and Rochester has lost a hand and his eyesight, and now lives in a house in the forest called Ferndean, and she immediately sets out for that house. Hello, I'm Jane. Oh, go away, you're a hallucination like Jane's voice that I heard the other night saying, I'm coming. You heard that? I heard that too. I'm the real Jane. Oh, really? And they sit down and talk, and she tells him everything, and he's jealous, but they realize they still love each other. Will you marry me? Now I'm free. With all my heart. Yes, sir. And after a while he even gains his eyesight again, and they have children and live happily ever after. So all in all, don't fuck around with governesses, they are survivors. And this, dear congregation, was Jane Eyre by Charlotte Brontë.
Vielen Dank.